All right. Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us in today's Ask the MSSO webinar. I am Dr. Anna Zhao Wang. I'm the Deputy Director of the MSSO and will facilitate today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to get to know where you're joining from today through a polling tool called Poll Everywhere. The easiest way to join is actually to scan my QR code, which I have in the next slide. If you are familiar with using the QR code, please wait until I show it in the next slide. But if you are new to Poll Everywhere, let's follow the steps on the screen together to get on Poll Everywhere. So first, open a browser on your computer or cell phone. Go to pollev.com. That is POLLEV.com. Then enter MEDTRA F388 as the username and click Join. So the username is MEDTRA F388. If you're asked to enter your name, click Skip because the voting is anonymous. If you need additional time to finish the steps, the instructions are also available in the welcome message that you can find in your chat or question pane. So here's the QR code. If you know how to use it, scan the QR code on your phone and it will take you directly to the question that's posted on Poll Everywhere. So for those of you who are on Poll Everywhere, please indicate your location on the map. And let me do that myself. And then we'll take a look at the results. Let me pull that over so we can see the results. All right. Okay, so looks like we have users joining us from United States and a number of countries in Europe, as well as Asia. That looks like South Korea. Welcome from all different areas of the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Okay, so let's get back to our PowerPoint presentation. Oops, I don't know what I did wrong here. All right, so here we are. Today's webinar is up to 90 minutes in a question and answer format. Questions include those submitted in advance to the MSSO and those received through the question pane during the webinar. For questions submitted in advance, the responding panel member has slides and screenshots prepared to help with their response. You may find the slides in the training materials page of MEDTRA.org and perhaps also in the handout session if Hannah has uploaded over there. For ad hoc questions received in the question pane, we'll try our best to provide references relevant to the question. Depending on the number of questions, we may not be able to answer all questions in the allotted time, or we may finish early and we'll definitely give the extra time back to you. Just a reminder, we're unable to answer specific coding questions. This webinar, as Hannah mentioned at the beginning, is recorded. If there are no technical issues, the recording will be posted on the MSSO YouTube channel as well as the training materials page on MEDTRA.org. So here's the process. Each question will be shown on the screen and read to the group. A panel member will respond to the question. If anyone has a follow-up question, please feel free to send your question to us through the question pane or raise your hand to request to ask your question verbally. And I'll show you how to do these things in the next slide. Okay, so first, make sure that your GoToWebinar panel is open. If you see a little white arrow in a red background pointing to your right on the upper right corner of your screen, click on the arrow and that will open your GoToWebinar panel. That will look like that. And then you can send your questions in the question pane where I put in a mock question just to demonstrate. After you type in your question, click send. Your question will show up in our view. You can also use raise your hand by clicking on the raising hand button for follow-up questions. Now let me introduce panel members and our webinar host. I invite my colleagues to turn on their camera. Oh, sorry. Every time I move, it changes. Sorry. Okay. So as a presenter, I can't really see the cameras that I presume all my colleagues' cameras are on. And you already know me. Other panel members are Dr. Judy Harrison, the MSSO Chief Medical Officer, Mr. Pat Revelle, the MSSO Director, and Mr. Brian O'Hare, the MSSO Terminology Maintenance Group Manager. Our webinar host today is Ms. Hannah Eaton. Today we have experts on the panel to answer all sorts of questions. Terminology questions, PTC questions, mapping questions, training questions, subscription questions, so on and so forth. So fire away your questions and let's get started. I'll turn the floor over to Hannah to bring up questions. Let me stop sharing my screen so that Hannah can share hers. And let's give Hannah a few minutes to get her screen up.
We'll begin with questions that we received by email before the session. Our first question is, what is the list of EEA translation languages? What is the process to translate MEDTRA into a new language, and who is involved in the translation?
Okay. All right, so I guess I'll take that question. I'll start by answering the last two questions first. So the process to translate MEDTRA into a new language involves several parties. Obviously, the MSSO. We work with a qualified translator with the requisite medical background, and the local regulatory authority that is the major recipient of that translation of MEDTRA. And the translator and the local regulatory authority work together to develop a set of linguistic conventions, which are essentially the ground rules for translating the MEDTRA terms and any other related documentation. And the local regulatory authority serves as a quality reviewer, and they review a significant sample of the terms translated by the translator to ensure that they're meeting quality expectations. And that, in sum, is how we develop a language and who's involved. With respect to the European Economic Area languages that we are translating, the list there is on the slide. So we have started there on the first column with the languages. You see the first on the left. We expect to deploy most of those by the first half of 2022. We've already started on the 4 additional languages that you see in the middle column there. And then in the future years, 2023 and 2024, we plan on an additional 8 languages that you see there. Those are just listed alphabetically. It's not necessarily the order in which we would do them, but within those 2 years, we would develop translations for those languages. So next slide, Hannah. So this is essentially the list of all of the languages that we'll have at the end of that time. The one language that I will point out that is not in the EEA language is Arabic. You see it there in the inner circle at the very top. So that is a translation that we are currently developing, and we do plan to deploy that towards the end of 2022, the end of this year. Okay.
Great. We have another translation question that was submitted, and it is, how are the translations checked from English to a different language? In case of any errors detected in a translation, are there mechanisms in place to fix them or to request a review?
So I'll answer that question as well. So quality is a big focus of maintaining the MEDTRA translations. We do use qualified translators with a requisite medical background to translate MEDTRA terms, and the MSSO performs a number of quality checks as well. However, there's always room for improvement, and if you do work with a MEDTRA translation in any of our currently supported languages that are being maintained, and you discover that there is a need for an improvement in that translation, you're more than welcome to submit a change request to the MSSO to do that. And the tool that's available to you is called WebCR. Some of you may be familiar with this tool. And the way it works to submit a translation update request is you need to supply your MEDTRA ID and your MEDTRA password that comes with your subscription. And this is the same ID and password that's used to access our other tools, such as our web-based browser and the MEDTRA version analysis tool, MBAT. Now, for clarity and to avoid confusion, before I continue, there is a separate password that's issued with your subscription called the change request ID or change request password that is used with WebCR. And this allows the submission of all change request types, including new terms and changes to the existing terms. Most organizations have developed policies and procedures around who gets this password in their organization. But the focus for this particular question is about translation update requests, which any MEDTRA user with their ID and password can submit. So let me show you how that's done. So once you go to our WebCR tool and log in, you'll see an interface that looks like the next slide here. And what you want to do is select the translation changes once you log in. And then in the next slide, you'll see a set of fields that will provide information we need to know as to what change you want to make. So the first two fields are, you need to enter either the English term name, or you can optionally enter the MEDTRA code. And then you need to, of course, select the language that you would like to request the update in. Once you do that, the current translation of that term will show in the field directly below it. And then in item 3 there, you see on the slide, you'll be asked to enter a proposed replacement. And after that, you'll be requested to provide a justification as to why you would like to adjust the translation of that term. And then you can save that request. And if you have more than one request, then you just simply repeat the process that I've described. So when you're finished with that, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the requests below that you've proposed suggestions to. If you've logged in for the very first time, you'll be asked to enter your email address. It should be a one-time only need to do that. This just allows us to know who submitted the request and how to get back to them with the results of their proposal. Once you've done that, you just click item number 2 there to submit the request, and that will come to the MSSO, and then we will get back to you with regards to the outcome of your request. And this is a similar process at this point for those of you that have submitted other kinds of change requests to us.
Thank you very much, Brian. I'm not seeing any follow-up questions for any translation questions, so we'll move on to question 3. And it is, will Snowmed CT and MEDTRA maps be included in regular MEDTRA releases? Will terms in the maps be deleted from one release to another? In other words, do new maps contain all the mappings of previous release or releases?
Thank you, Hannah. I'll take that question and welcome everyone. Go to the next slide. So ICH and the MSSO and Snowmed International, which are the owners of Snowmed CT, comprehensive medical terminology used in electronic health records. They have a collaborative agreement, first of all, to develop and now maintain a set of bidirectional maps between MEDTRA and Snowmed CT. They are not included in the MEDTRA releases, but you are able to access these maps on the same downloads page as to where you go to access the MEDTRA releases themselves. So you see here the first production release, which was in April last year. It is available in a download package on the MEDTRA downloads page, so you do need to be a licensed MEDTRA subscriber to access this page with a username and password. Similarly, licensed Snowmed CT users can access the same maps with the same content from Snowmed International directly. So we have the April 2021 release package, and in the same way that we publicize new terms that will be added to future releases of the maps for MEDTRA, we also provide a supplemental release. So these are new terms that will be included in the upcoming release of other maps. So you're able to get a snapshot into the future, what will be coming in the next release. Next slide, please. So these maps are released on an annual basis, where next release is scheduled for next month. And because MEDTRA is updated twice a year, Snowmed International is also updated on a regular basis. They actually have now monthly releases. We determine which releases of the two terminologies we're going to include in the map. So we try to get a fairly close concordance in time with respect to the content. So the April 22 releases of the maps will be based on MEDTRA 24.1 and the January 2022 release of Snowmed CT International version. So in answer to the question about are terms deleted, these maps are essentially cumulative in the same way that we add terms to MEDTRA. We're adding terms to these maps, and through our MapCR online change request tool, we've received and implemented about 250 requests for new terms to be mapped from one terminology to the other. We've also proactively worked with our Snowmed International colleagues to identify core COVID-19 terms that are common to both terminologies and include those in the maps. Now, because both terminologies are also changing with additions and currency changes in the case of MEDTRA, similar thing can happen on Snowmed CT. They can inactivate terms. So the maps will be updated to reflect changes in the two terminologies. And if we go to the next slide, please. I can show you some examples of new content on one terminology. We already had an existing LLT for pharyngotonsillitis. That concept wasn't available currently in Snowmed CT, so that concept was unmappable. Now, a new content has been added to Snowmed CT in the January 2022 version, so we're able to add a term to map those two concepts within the terminologies. Now, on the Snowmed CT side, they perform inactivations as somewhat similar to making MEDTRA terms non-current, but they have some different nuances. So here we have an example of a term that on the Snowmed side, FSN stands for fully specified name. It's almost like a PT. So they had a term for immune thrombocytopenic purpura, which was mapped to our LLT, immune-mediated thrombocytopenic purpura. That term on the Snowmed side was inactivated, so it was no longer valid for use between our releases. And so we had to remap that to a corresponding concept. It's now represented by the Snowmed term immune thrombocytopenia. So you'll see that there are some additions and potentially some inactivations, remaps, or potentially deletions if a term is inactivated and we can't find a suitable replacement for it. That term could be taken out of the terminology. So I hope that addresses the questions. Are there any additional questions on the Snowmed CT maps?
None have come in so far, but users, please feel free to submit your questions in the question pane. All right, well, we'll move on to questions 4 and 5, which are related. They are all IMDRF terms mapped to MEDTRA? How many terms have been mapped to date to the IMDRF from MEDTRA? And then, does the MSSO provide a change list that affect IMDRF coded terms? Where is a list of IMDRF and MEDTRA mapping?
Okay, I'll be happy to take that mapping question. And the first thing I need to explain is, what is IMDRF? You might not be familiar with this unless you're actively working in the device reporting area. So it stands for the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. And they have developed a comprehensive terminology for reporting adverse events associated with devices. And this terminology is required for device-related adverse event reporting in the European Union. If you go to the FDA website, they also use IMDRF terms instead of MEDTRA. Now, many of these annexes in this device terminology refer to the devices themselves. So there's a set of terms in Annex A for the medical device problem itself, the nature of the malfunction of the device, as well as investigations that you might perform in other annexes. They're covered because you need to investigate the root cause of a device malfunction. What's relevant for us as MEDTRA users, we're interested in the clinical impact of any device malfunctions on patients. So this Annex E, which is actually the health effects, clinical signs or symptoms or conditions that are resulting from a device malfunction. So those terms have been mapped to MEDTRA. The first release of these sets of terminologies was in 2020, and you will see here, based on the latest release, which was actually published on March this year, it's updated annually, IMDRF provide a change log for any additions, modifications, or deletions to any of these included annexes. So you'll be able to find out what the changes are by downloading that simple spreadsheet. I would note that the MSSO does not maintain this mapping. IMDRF develops the mapping, but we collaborate with them on Annex E if they add any clinical signs or symptoms terms that they wish to capture within their terminology. We work with them to find an appropriate MEDTRA counterpart, because we recognize many companies working in the device arena also use MEDTRA within their internal databases as a way of capturing more comprehensive information about adverse events in general. So we provide a bridge between this device reporting terminology and MEDTRA, so you can link to your internal databases. And the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the annex, all of the annexes are updated each year, and we work with IMDRF to update the mapping component for Annex E. There are about 800 Annex E terms in there, the majority of which are mapped to MEDTRA. So you can see here they have a somewhat similar body system approach to classifying adverse events. And they also provide definitions of those terms. And in the non-IMDRF column on the right, you will see the appropriate MEDTRA term and code for those concepts. IMDRF does maintain a change request process. If you go to their website, you can submit change requests to have new terms added to any of the annexes or modifications or deletions made. They handle that whole maintenance process. Judy, thank you for that information. So just to clarify, IMDRF has many annex parts, and only Annex E is mapped to MEDTRA. Correct. Yes. Okay. And they do seek our input when they review changes to the mapping. Yes. It has ticked up in this most recent release from 21 to 22. They received for Annex E in particular about 200 requests for new terms to be added. Now, only about 80 of them were accepted, and we provided the MEDTRA mapping component. I'd say the focus is very much on adverse events that are related to devices. For example, there was a request to add a term for COVID-19 to Annex E, and they said, well, it's important, but it's nothing to do with an adverse event related to a device. So that particular term was not accepted. Okay, thanks. Any other questions on IMDRF?
I am not seeing any in the question pane right now. So we will move along to question number 6. If you have IMDRF questions that you're still thinking about, submit them at any time. Question 6 is, I heard that there would be an ICD-10 to MEDTRA mapping. Will the MSSO maintain that mapping?
Thank you, Hannah. I'll address that one. We've been working with the MEDTRA Management Committee and they've agreed to the development of an ICD-10 to MEDTRA mapping, and the direction there is important. So it goes only from ICD-10 to MEDTRA. And to be clear, what we're talking about is the International Classification of Diseases. That's the ICD-10 piece, or ICD piece, and 10 being that specific version produced in 2019. So from a WHO perspective, they're really not adding to it unless there are some emergency changes, of which there were with related to the pandemic and COVID-19 terms. But essentially, the maintenance of ICD-10 has stopped. It's generally used for coding of national mortality and morbidity statistics. So you'll see a lot of different registries and other sources of data that end up using it. Should not be confused with the kind of national versions, which in the US, for instance, is called ICD-10-CM. And there's different national versions in a variety of different countries. It's possible that the mapping can support that, but there are many terms that are added to these national versions that are very specific and extend well beyond the original ICD scope or ICD-10 scope. So the work that we did is initially complete. So we've completed the mapping. It's out for review by a set of MEDTRA experts, both regulatory and industry users. And we hope to get their feedback by mid-April, and then work with WHO to make the initial release, I hope by mid-year, but I'm giving a wishy-washy date of sometime in 2022. So I know that will be of great interest to many users, so we actually very much look forward to providing it. Next slide, please. So the mapping itself, just to give you a little bit of a flavor of it, is roughly 11,000 terms. It will be produced in a spreadsheet format and available on the MEDTRA website, very similar to the screenshots that you saw earlier on the downloads page of the MEDTRA.org website. We are, as I mentioned, just doing it in spreadsheet format right now. That may change over time if users identify a different format that would be better, but the current thing is to make it a bit easier and put it in spreadsheet, but certainly we can evolve as the needs of users evolve as well. We will maintain the mapping going forward. As I mentioned, probably expect very little changes from the ICD-10 side, but as MEDTRA changes, we'll make updates, and of course users have the option to be able to propose revisions to mappings that we've already made. So since we've mapped almost all the terms that are included in there, I suspect most of the requests will be in the form of changes to existing maps. Next slide, please. We are also looking in an exploratory phase right now at an ICD-11 mapping. So that's the next iteration of ICDs. And this one is intended, at least for now, to be a bidirectional mapping between both terminologies. If you're at all familiar with ICD-11, it's a bit of a larger terminology than 10, so the task will be larger to do the mapping. We have something to build on, obviously, with ICD-10, but it's a much larger scope of a terminology than its predecessor. We will maintain it as we did with the ICD-10 one in coordination with WHO. And as this develops, we'll post more information either through broadcast emails or on the MEDTRA.org website. But we're still working with WHO, so I don't have many more details to provide relative to ICD-11. With that, any questions related to the mappings for ICD?
Pat, just to help clarify, you mentioned the ICD-10 and ICD-11 mapping. The ICD-10 is one direction, correct?
Correct. So that one will only work from ICD-10 to MEDTRA, where ICD-11 is intended to work in both directions. Now, if you're thinking, oh, it's just like a round trip, it isn't always that way because the terminologies are a little bit different. So it's possible you can start with, say, an ICD-11 term and go to a MEDTRA term and potentially go from that same MEDTRA term to potentially a different ICD-11 term. That's just the nature of mappings. And as I think as anyone who's used a mapping before, they are generally useful, but not 100% accurate in all cases. So my general point is there's a potential loss of data, but I think it's better that you are receiving and have access to a well-maintained and well-supported mapping rather than try to do it yourselves.
Thank you, Pat. I think we have a question came in the question pane. Also, as a reminder, if you like to just raise your hand, we can also unmute your mic so that you can ask your question verbally.
Yes, we had a follow-up question looking for some clarity on what do you mean by ICD-11 works on both directions?
Yeah, so just to clarify, essentially what that will be is two different mappings. One will be, you'll take a term from MEDTRA and we'll tell you what the corresponding ICD-11 term would be. There'll be a separate mapping, although obviously related, that will say, okay, here is an ICD-11 term, here is its mapped MEDTRA term. So that's what I mean by mapping in both directions. They will essentially be two separate mappings, but logically very much related. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Pat. I think the one direction mapping with the ICD-10, we hope to help those of you who are also looking into insurance data or hospital data. That mapping could help you to convert those data into MEDTRA coded data so you can do analysis with your own safety database that's already coded in MEDTRA. Now with the ICD-11, which is bidirectional, then our user has the option to convert the ICD-11 coded data to MEDTRA, or you can do the opposite direction to convert MEDTRA coded data to ICD-11. So it depends on your use case. The bidirectional mapping could be helpful. All right.
All right. Thank you very much for the follow-up question. We will move along to question number 7, which is, how do I extract the list of terms in a specific SMQ?
Okay, so I'll take this question. There are several ways to do it. One of them is to use the MEDTRA ASCII files because all of the SMQ data, MEDTRA data are all included in the ASCII files. To do that, you're going to need to ask your IT colleagues to extract the list of terms in a SMQ that you're interested. But today I want to show you 2 ways to do it that you can do it yourself without the help of your IT colleagues. So to do that, I like to demonstrate. So I'm going to grab the control and share my screen. I have the desktop browser open. That's one of the ways to extract a list of terms for an SMQ. You can do either with a web-based browser or with a desktop browser. For the convenience, I decided to use the desktop browser. Now I have desktop browser loaded with MEDTRA 25.0 English version. Now to do that, I first need to change to the browser view from SOC to SMQ. So I click that, then the panel on the left display, instead of displaying SOCs, now it's displaying SMQs. Because I have the 25.0 version, we got the brand new SMQ, which is, let me find it. Oh, here it is, which is the non-infectious myocarditis and pericarditis. This is a new SMQ added in the version 25.0. So to get a list of terms under SMQ, what you need to do is click on or right-click on a SMQ to open up the menu. And in the menu, there's one item called Export SMQ. So if I click on that, and then the question, they'll ask me, the browser will ask me a question, do you want to include inactive PTs? I don't want any inactive PTs in my list, so I say no. And then the browser will work its way and try to open up a spreadsheet. Here it is. And it shows that the SMQ that I wanted was the acute pancreatitis, and they list all the PTs under this SMQ, including not only PT name, the names of the PT, but also codes, and indicate the level is all PTs, including also these terms attributes within SMQ, and that is scope, category, weight, status, addition version, and last modified version. And since the SMQ I chose, acute pancreatitis, is algorithmic SMQ, so you can see that they have different categories. So some of them are category A, some of them are category B, some of them are category C. So for those of you who are familiar with algorithmic SMQs, you know what they mean. So this is one easy way to get a list of terms for an SMQ. The other way to do it, that you can also do it without the help of your IT colleagues, is to do it through the SMQ production spreadsheet. Now, to get to SMQ production spreadsheet, we need to get to MEDTRA release package because it's part of the release package. So here I have the MEDTRA.org homepage, and on the upper right corner, there are several options I can choose. One of them is downloads. And if I click the downloads, I'll get to this login page because you need your organization's MEDTRA ID and password to log in the downloads page since it's protected. And only current MEDTRA users can have access to it. Now, I already entered my username and password, then I'm in the downloads page with all the protected information. Then I can click open the most recent version of MEDTRA, which is 25.0 release. And I can open up English. You can choose the language that you're interested. And I open up the English. And this is what a typical release package looks like. There's ASCII files, SEQ files, and a bunch of documents that we provide with the release. And one of them is the SMQ spreadsheet. And we call it the SMQ production spreadsheet. And I have one already open it up for me. There it is. So in the SMQ production spreadsheet, in the second tab called the SMQ 25.0, has the list of SMQs and their subordinate PTs. So again, I'll go with the acute pancreatitis. If I click on the plus sign on the left-hand side, and there you go, it opens up the list of PT terms under the acute pancreatitis SMQ. Now in this spreadsheet, it only has the scope, whether they're narrow or broad, and category, and term name and term code. It doesn't have other attributes in this particular format. So those are the two ways that you can do yourself anytime, either use the production spreadsheet or use one of our browsers to extract the term list from a particular SMQ. So any questions for that?
I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. Thank you for that demo, Anna. I will go back to the questions we received via email. Question 8 is, are all the COVID-19 update terms under the COVID-19 SMQ?
I'll take that, and thank you for the segue to talking about SMQs and lists of terms. On our homepage, you will see a link to our COVID-19 dedicated page. And there we maintain a cumulative list of all COVID-19 related terms in a spreadsheet format. It started with 23.0 and it's updated to 25.0. Now, the way that I actually generate this spreadsheet for users is to go into our MVAT tool to see what has changed from one version to another. And I look through the several hundred new LLTs that we have with each release. And it's somewhat subjective. I've, for the benefit of users, try to identify terms that might be related in a broad sense to COVID-19, that might be of interest to you, whether you're tracking vaccination status, test results, diagnoses, anything that I can think of could be relevant to you and I want to highlight to you are provided in this spreadsheet. I think it is a useful exercise to do. You could do it yourselves going into MVAT. You might have a different focus, but I've tried to be as broad as I can to identify terms from any different SOC that might be related. So you can see here some very topical ones coming in for 25.0, TTS, breakthrough COVID-19, and there's some, and of course the Omicron and Delta variants, and some tangentially related terms, primary vaccination failure, secondary vaccination failure. They're not specifically related to COVID-19, but in the context of administering vaccines and tracking breakthrough infections, these might be of use to you. So it's a list of about 200 LLTs and provided as just a highlight to you of what's new in MEDTRA related to COVID-19. Now, the COVID-19 SMQ is much more of a focused query specific for COVID-19. It comprises about 50 PTs, and we have terms that are very specific to COVID-19. So any general signs and symptoms, taste, smell disorders, investigations, treatments like antiviral therapy, these general vaccination terms would not be included. It's much more focused. So I hope that distinguishes between the two types of lists that we make available. One just more informational list, and then the SMQ is actually a query that you can run to screen your databases for potential COVID-19 cases. Any questions on the differences between those two?
Thank you, Judy. We haven't received any follow-up questions yet, but feel free to submit them at any time. We will move along to question number 9. Is the abbreviation NOS intended to mean that the verbatim does not otherwise specify/qualify the name diagnosis, or that there is not a MEDTRA LLT that specifically matches the primary term?
Okay, thank you. I'll take that one also. We have to go back a little bit in history. In the beginning of MEDTRA, we had quite a lot of these unspecified or not otherwise specified NOS terms. And they're intended to convey the information that you don't have specific information about what has been reported. And that's probably not very useful. They were actually represented at the PT level, but starting in 6.1, we made the decision with the MEDTRA Management Committee to demote them all to the LLT level. And as of 6.1, we are not accepting any additional NOS terms into the terminology. So as a result, not every plain, unqualified term has an NOS counterpart. Now, in general coding principles, you shouldn't be using these NOS terms in general. Obviously, if you have a very specific type of headache reported, like cluster headache, you select the closest match to that, which is cluster headache. So select the most specific term. Or if you just have a plain term headache reported, just use the plain LLT headache. Don't make any assumptions whether people know what type it was or that they'd specified. In those rare circumstances where you might have a report saying, patient had a headache and I don't know what type it was, they didn't specify, then according to your conventions, which you should clearly document, you could have the ability to choose to code it to headache NOS. So it's intended for use when they specify that something isn't specified, if you know what I mean. However, representing these concepts at the PT level, of course, they're all unqualified. So they're just not terribly well used these days. Where we have found some utility is that some of the older terminologies, I would say, like ICD-9 morphed into ICD-10. They have quite a lot of these unspecified terms. And there we are able to map them in our mapping initiatives to the corresponding NOS term in MEDTRA if one is available. But as I said, not all claim terms have the corresponding NOS terms. They're somewhat outdated and don't have much utility really in signal detection.
Thank you, Judy, for that explanation of the subtle difference. It's helpful to coders and those who are interested in taking the certified MEDTRA coder exams as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. We have a question submitted about the SMQ spreadsheets. The SMQ spreadsheet asks for a password when you download it from the MEDTRA.org website. Can you remind me what we input? The MEDTRA browser password does not work to unzip or open the file.
Oh yeah, very good question. I forgot to mention when I demonstrate the process. Since the SMQ spreadsheet is part of the MEDTRA release package, when you try to open it, in other words, extract it from the zip file, it will ask you for the unzip password. And the unzip password is version specific. So each MEDTRA version has its unique unzip password, and that is distributed to your organization's MEDTRA subscription point of contact. And your point of contact can also extract that or retrieve it from the self-service tool application. So if you are the point of contact, you can type in your email, and the self-service tool will match to our database and provide all these passwords to you. If you're not a point of contact or MEDTRA subscription point of contact of your organization, feel free to reach out to your organization's POC to ask for that. If you don't know who the POC is in your organization, feel free to contact the MSSO help desk. We'll let you know who they are.
Great, thank you, Anna.
And I have one related question that somebody might be interested in. Is the SMQ spreadsheet available in all languages?
Yes, I believe so. I think I opened up in other language packages, and it's part of the release package too in all languages. I like to get it confirmed from our terminology maintenance colleague, Brian. Is that correct?
Well, actually, it's only available in English.
But is it included in the other packages?
It's not. Only included in the English.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forget what I said.
Yes. What we're looking to do to provide the SMQ spreadsheet in other languages is to improve our tools, the web-based browser and MBAT, so that people can download a similar spreadsheet for their use. So that's how we're going to try to address the ability to provide that information in other languages.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting my mistake. So believe what Brian said. We do have an English package, but not in other languages. Okay. Thank you, Brian.
But if you do want the contents of an SMQ in another language, you could go to the web-based browser or the desktop browser, select your appropriate language, and then export the SMQ in that language. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So
there
is a working around.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. For individual SMQs, that you can select any language and export the contents of an SMQ in that language. We just do not have at this time a entire spreadsheet for that lists the SMQs and their contents as we do for English, and we're working to try and provide that within our tools when we release the next version of the web-based browser and MBAT.
Great. We don't have any more questions at the moment, so we will move on to question number 10, which is also about the browser. The MEDTRA desktop browser is great in cases of travel and poor internet connection. Does the MSSO plan to implement supplemental terms to MDB? Okay.
So I'll take that question. Let me explain what we mean by supplemental terms for those of you that are less familiar with what that means. So what we mean is that the supplemental essentially represents the current state of MEDTRA as it is right now. In other words, all of the change requests that we processed since the previous MEDTRA release. And you can actually view this information in our web-based browser by selecting supplemental view, or in our MEDTRA version analysis tool by selecting the supplemental view. So for example, if you wanted to see, as of right now, up to today, what are all the new terms that will be added for MEDTRA 25.1, our autumn release, you can go to our MVAT tool, for example, select supplemental view, and get a list of what those are. So to answer the question, in order to use the supplemental terms, you need to have an internet connection because those that information is always changing, and therefore it's not feasible to be able to use the supplemental information in the MEDTRA desktop browser.
Thank you, Brian. No questions yet, so we will move on to another email question. Can MEDTRA coding be used in non-drug clinical trials just to code conditions and events of interest for publication purposes?
Thank you, Hannah, and I'll take that one. Yes, absolutely. MEDTRA is not restricted for use in clinical trials or pharmacovigilance or for drugs. It can be used for any number of regulated products or even non-drug trials, epidemiological studies, publications, anywhere where you've got clinical information that you want to capture and communicate in a standardized way, you can use MEDTRA.
Great. And no follow-up. So question 12, what is the maximum number of secondary SOCs available for a term in MEDTRA? Anna, do you want to take this question?
Yes, I did. I was talking, but I was muted. Sorry about that. So as you all know, there's a literally a physical limitation in terms of a secondary link or links, because MEDTRA has only 27 SOCs, and some of the SOCs are single axial. So within the limitation and following MEDTRA rules, a preferred term can have as many secondary links as appropriate. I'll share an interesting fact. In MEDTRA, let me show the PT that has the most links in MEDTRA. So I'm going to take the control for just a little bit and share my screen. And you can see I have the browser still open as we did earlier. Now this time I'll change it to SOC view. And the PT name is called the charge syndrome. There you go. So if I open up the PT term, do a right click to open up the menu and select details and occurrences. And there it is. The PT charge syndrome has total 8 links. The primary one is congenital, and all the others are secondary links because the syndrome affects many parts of our body. And if you're interested in how they're linked in the 8 SOCs, this tiny little window shows you the path from the PT to all of the 8 SOCs. So that's it. Any questions? Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Anna. We have received a follow-up question about the supplemental lists. So I will show that. Could you allow users to upload the supplemental terms to MDB based on the weekly incremental lists?
Yeah, Brian's muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll handle that question. So what we're posting on our website are what we call these difference files, or sequence files as we call them. If you're familiar with the MEDTRA download package, you see 2 folders there in the zip file when you extract it. One is the full set of MEDTRA files, and the other is these change files, or sequence files as we call them. That's what we're publishing. And it was really the precursor to our ability to provide the supplemental views in the web-based browser and MVAC to let users at least take a peek at what is coming up. So to answer the question, you would not be able to use the MEDTRA desktop browser with what we're posting on a weekly basis. Your most viable thing to do is to use our online tools so that you can view that information.
Great. Thank you so much. We will go back to the PowerPoint as I'm not seeing any follow-ups. And so here we have question 13. Does a MEDTRA license allow you to use past versions of the dictionary or only the current version?
Thanks, Hannah. We get this question a fair amount through the help desk, and so I'm kind of glad it came through on this as well. So the answer is yes. So once you subscribe, if today was your first day of subscription, you would have access to all prior versions and translations of MEDTRA. Now, within the MEDTRA.org website, we post a number of different versions, but we don't post them all the way back through the entirety of time. So if you're looking for a version that is not available on the MEDTRA.org website, please contact the help desk and they can provide you in that even earlier version. But in general, most users that we deal with are looking at the last 2 or 3 versions at most. But if you have a more historical need, you can certainly contact the help desk, even if today was your first day of subscription. So yes, it's certainly possible.
Wonderful. And I believe that was our last email submitted question. So please use this time to send any of your final questions if you have any for the panelists.
Right. So typing questions takes time. So I'm going to give a few more minutes for users to ask additional questions that you have. And as a Q&A session, I want to turn the table around a little bit. Now I have 2 questions I would like to ask our audience to give us some input. So let me take the control again. Right, so I'll share my screen. And I have a question. This is the first question we have that we already went through. I do have an interest in understand as a user, which way is your favorite way to contact the DMSSO. So for those of you who has already entered or on the Poll Everywhere, please make your choice, and you can select more than one option. The multiple options are allowed in this case. And if you have forgotten how to get on the Poll Everywhere, check your question pane, and that will over there you will have the instructions on how to get onto the Poll Everywhere. So let me activate so you will all see it and be able to vote on it. Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone need help to get on Poll Everywhere? Let us know. Just send a question to us. We'll help you to get on there again. Very good. I see some of you like the online chat. Yeah, that's a very convenient way to contact our help desk, and you can chat with a real help desk representative. We don't have chat bots. We don't use machine. We have real people manning our help desk chat. Okay, very good. WeChat, that's one of the social media platforms that we have. Phone call, yes, we have a help desk number that you can call us. Yes, YouTube, yes, we've received inquiries through YouTube. WhatsApp too, we have several groups on WhatsApp that people can ask questions. Very good. Looks like the 2 main ways are the email to the MSSO help@medtra.org and then the online chat. through MEDTRA.org. This helps us to plan our future communication methods. I want to thank you very much for your input. Okay. So if all of you have put in your input, I'm going to switch to the next question. The next question is also about communication. Email, as shown on this poll question, is our main communication method. We use it to remind our organization's billing contact to renew your organization's subscription so that your right to use MEDTRA is not interrupted. We also use emails to announce training classes each month. However, broadcast emails can be blocked by organizations' security screening. So as a result, the email don't always get to the recipients. So in the case of subscription renewal, it would lead to interruption of your organization's MEDTRA subscription. So to overcome this obstacle, we are investigating the potential use of text messaging as an alternative way for important notices, such as MEDTRA subscription renewal. So I would like very much to hear your thoughts about text messaging, which I have a question set up in the next one. So let me activate this one. So I would like to hear your thoughts on what type of message you would like to hear from us through text messaging. Because some people may see text messaging as intrusive. So we want to make sure we're very careful about using text messaging. And your input will be very helpful. So I do see some attendees vote for other. Okay, very good. Training class is actually ranking number 1. I'm happy to know that. Training is my favorite topic. Okay, very good. Thank you for your input. And for those of you who voted other, I have one more question for you. So if you voted other, I have this open-ended question. You can type in what type of message you would like us to send through text messaging. This is only for those of you who voted other in the previous question. So you can type in text through your phone or laptop. Well, I'll leave this open for those of you may take a while to type in. So let's go back to Hannah, who mentioned their follow-up questions.
Yes, I will show them on the screen. We received a question asking, main SOC is required to be used for registration purposes, then what is the use of secondary SOCs?
Okay, I'd be happy to take that one. Yes, you are correct that the primary SOC allocation is the one to be used when communicating either for regulatory reporting or exchanging information between partners. But we do build in secondary SOCs to provide alternative views of the data. I think the best explanation of this is easy format is in our data analysis and retrieval webinars. It explains the use of secondary SOCs. Then you might not ever use them for analysis purposes, but there are occasions where the regulators might ask you to provide an alternative view of the data to further get a better medical understanding of the safety issue. So there are circumstances and methodologies for extracting and using the secondary SOC information to your advantage. This topic is also covered well within the MEDTRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. So I'd refer you to those resources for a fuller explanation.
Thank you, Judy. I think we have another question about subscription, so we'll give Hannah a few seconds to paste it onto the screen.
I'll make it bigger for everybody. It is, we need to set Peraton up as a new provider to allow for our MEDTRA license payment, which will take some time. I hope this will not cause any issues.
Yeah, in general, it really should not. And I think we're pretty forgiving as long as people are in touch with us. So it's not unusual for us to hear from users that because of the transition to Peraton, they need to establish us as a vendor in their system. And it, depending upon the size of the organization, that may take a bit of time, but fully understood. But I would encourage you that when you receive the invoice, that you communicate, the time frame. But we tend not to cancel subscriptions when we're in touch with people. So even when we do cancel them, we try multiple times before we end up canceling. So certainly we can accommodate a bit of a longer time frame as long as you're communicating to us.
Thank you, Pat. So the key is communication. Let us know if you run into challenges and will take a longer time before you can renew your license. So definitely we can work things out with you together. Okay, so I did receive inputs for the open-ended question, which is interesting. I like to share it with everyone to take a look. Okay, so now you can see for those who chose others, mainly they want to focus on the text messaging to notify users browser not working, maybe because of our maintenance, routine maintenance when the browser is offline. So they said that might be a good opportunity for the MSSO to send or to notify them through text messaging. Very good. I didn't think about that. And also deadline for change requests. It's a good way it's a good message to do it through text messaging. This new one just came in for trainees who attended all MEDTRA training courses. Is it possible that they get a MEDTRA cert by the end of session? We provide, although this might be a different question from what I originally asked, we provide attendance certificate after each training class, including this one. And there is a requirement for a person to get attendance certificate. You need to attend a certain length of the webinar. So if some of you had an emergency at work that you have to leave the webinar, you may not end up getting a certificate. So, so that's all I have over here. I want to thank you very much for your input. We certainly will take your feedback into our consideration in the future potential use of text messaging. Hannah, do we have any other questions?
We haven't received any more questions.
Okay, very good. So now that we have responded to all of your questions and you have also generously, kindly answered our questions, I thank you for your attention and participation. If you have additional questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach us through email, online chat, or social media. As we discussed earlier, to see you again in future training classes, webinars, or face-to-face classes when we resume them. So I wish you all a good rest of the day. Bye now.